Hi to everybody. It's so great to see so many faces still popping in. I'm Matthew Albrecht. I'm on the board of the Peace Alliance. I've been around since the beginning of the organization, and it's just such an honor to connect together with all of you tonight. We anticipate it'll be a fun and enlivening way to celebrate our 20th anniversary here. And we're so excited to have Marianne Williamson joining us tonight. She's truly the main reason this organization even exists. So we'll start off just by introducing her to those of you who might not be as familiar with her. I'm sure there aren't many, but nevertheless, just in case. Marianne is a best-selling author, political activist, spiritual thought leader, as well as a former candidate for president of the United States. For over 4 decades, she's been a leader in spiritually progressive circles. She's also the author of 16 books, 4 of which have been #1 New York Times bestsellers. And for our sake tonight, we honor her place as a founder of this organization. As I said, this organization and our works over the years just would not exist without her. So we're all more than grateful. And with that, I think let's just go ahead and dive into the conversation. I'd initially prepared a couple of questions I wanted to start off with, Marianne, but today you released what I think is an incredibly powerful, inspiring, and critical manifesto for the Democratic Party. And while we're a nonpartisan organization, certainly people could argue we're left-leaning. What you wrote in this manifesto has so much in it that's universally true and important for all of us as Americans to look at. And given that you just put it out, I thought we might take a few minutes right off the bat to discuss some of it, if that sounds good to you, or better yet, maybe just share whatever you want to share to begin with, and then we can go into
Well, I can certainly dance with you wherever you want to go, Matthew, if you want to ask any questions or whatever, or we can go sort of straight into the peace issue. But I'm open to however you want to do this.
Well, this I'll ask a question then because it kind of
Okay.
could feed into the peace issue too. There's one of the lines in it that I love. I don't love it, but it's such a good line. It says, "We must acknowledge our complicity in creating the oligarchy that runs this country today," which is referring to the Democratic Party. Though again, this is pretty much true across the board. And I just wanted to see if you could share more about what you mean by this, and in particular, why does that make it so hard for people like us here at the Peace Alliance to affect real policy change in the ways we'd like?
Absolutely. So what's proverbially called the military-industrial complex, of course, a phrase that was coined by President Eisenhower in his farewell address, is part of a matrix of corporate power. Insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, gun manufacturers, big food companies, big chemical companies, big agricultural companies, big oil, and big banks and defense contractors. It's part of one big matrix. When it comes to defense contractors, remember, we're talking about almost $1 trillion a year right now in defense spending, almost $1 trillion. That's how much we invest in war every year. And the reason the work of someplace like the Peace Alliance is so difficult is because we invest so much more in war than we invest in peace. And we invest so much more in war than in peace because war is good business. What peace offers is the possible sustainability and survivability of the human race for another 100 years. But survivability and sustainability of the human race, safety, health, well-being of the American people is not now our governing principle. It's not now our bottom line. Our bottom line, our governing principle is short-term profit maximization for huge corporate entities, in this case, such as defense contracting business. Abraham Lincoln said that the Civil War had been fought so that we would continue to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. He said that the war was won so that that would not perish from the earth. And I think the larger question we have now, whether it has to do with peace, whether it has to do with healthcare, whether it has to do with health itself, whether it has to do with energy, it's all really part of the same larger conversation, is whether the democratic rights of the people, theoretically endowed by God, inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, will in fact take precedence over short-term corporate profits. So right now, the Department of Peace, for instance, as a concept, we now, when you look at the amount of money that we spend on the State Department, for instance, on diplomatic peace-creating efforts, is a fraction of what we spend on war. So people such as all of us here, those of us who are interested in the work of the Peace Alliance, those who are trying to put people first in any area are understandably frustrated, even angry. We've seen some things recently that show how far that anger can go when people feel that there's just no fighting back against this corporate behemoth, which now in so many ways owns our government and has turned Washington into a system of legalized bribery. But what I think is so important, and what I think really attracts many people to an organization such as this, is that we've always had a more integrative approach. We've always understood that you can't just fight this on the level of symptom. Matthew, you and I have literally been talking about this for years, that we have to address the level of root cause. And on the level of root cause, some rethinking is called for here. And I think when it comes to peace and violence, as you and I have talked about so much, just like we started to recognize that health is not the absence of sickness. Sickness is the absence of health. So you don't just invest in allopathic medicine so that if you get sick, you can try to eradicate or suppress the symptoms of illness. You invest proactively in the creation of health. That has to do with the food you eat. This has to do with your exercise. This has to do with your lifestyle and so forth. So now, and this is where I think an organization like this is so important, we, on one hand, obviously, we have to treat these things on the level of the symptom, the incredibly corrupt way that defense contractors dominate and influence our foreign policy and the U.S. war machine, all of that. None of that's a surprise to anyone here. But also, I think the shift in thinking that's happening right now has to do with proactive understanding that we must create peace. And what I found, like when I ran for president, there's so much openness. And by the way, you know, you were talking about our being left-leaning. Yeah, we are left-leaning, but let's not kid ourselves. A lot of the conversation right now going on about decrease in defense spending and so forth is coming from the right as well as from the left, because this anti-corporate dominance is taking hold on the right as well as the left. I think a lot of people don't realize, and I find people are very interested when they do realize, peace creation is a real thing. There are 4 factors which, when present in any system, and this could be a corner of an American city or another corner of the world, when these 4 factors are present, it statistically indicates that there will be a greater incidence of peace and a lower incidence of violence. And those 4 factors are reduction of violence against women, expanded economic opportunities for women, expanded educational opportunities for children, and an amelioration of unnecessary human despair. That's where we should be putting our resources. That's what we should be putting our investments, is in proactively creating peace. The fact that we do not is more than corrupt. And that's what I think really is the urgency of this moment. This is more than corruption we're talking about. This is human malfunction. You now have the Secretary General of the United Nations saying we're on an unsustainable trajectory. So that when JFK said we will get rid of war, or war will get rid of us, this has relevance now in a very practical way. It cannot continue the way it is. And when we were children, we were taught about evolution, and evolution is works this way. If a species gets to the point where its behavior is malfunctional, unsustainable for the survival of the species, then one of 2 things is going to happen. It's either going to evolve in a different direction, or it can very easily become extinct. And I think that that's a real shift in the American mind over the last few decades. We have awakened to the fact, sort of out of our magical thinking, that we'll be okay. We might not be okay. And so we now must make this evolutionary turn. And when I use the word malfunctional, we've moved beyond dysfunctional. We are in malfunction. And so I think those of us, such as those involved in an organization like this, who are articulating a new way not only of acting, but of thinking, consciously, proactively creating peace. Not just decreasing your military budget, but actually also increasing your investment in those things which actually create greater peace. And to see how that kind of mentality and what that would have meant, for instance, Israel and Gaza, what that would have meant, Ukraine and Russia, not to even mention the terrible criminal activities of so much of American foreign policy over the last 50 years, which has been nothing short of military imperialism around the world. So this is an important conversation. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad you have so many people who are interested in pursuing it.
Absolutely. And by the way, anybody who wants to get involved in the conversation, if you have a question, you can raise your hand, and pretty shortly here, we'll start calling on folks. So hopefully people know how to raise your hand, because I actually am not sure, Terry. I don't know if you know how. But anyway, I see some hands going up. Good. Um, yeah, that's interesting. Practical. How do we the practicalities of peacemaking? Well, this is true here as well, right? The divisiveness right now seems to be, at least in the modern times, at an all-time high. Just the level of toxic discourse, the hatred of our enemies. It just seems so toxic. I mean, you've been talking a lot about that. How do we hold that? What do we do? What is needed?
Well, I think, it's really significant that you point to the tenor of our public dialogue as an example of violence, because you're absolutely right. We have become the disunited states. And it's very Buddhist, isn't it? It's not just right speech, it's right thought, it's right action. And the violence that you see in this country does include the fabric of our national conversation. And I know I personally, and I think I'm sure everybody here would agree with me, you see as much smug, self-righteous, arrogant, really emotionally violent, psychologically violent conversation coming from those on the left as from those on the right. Um, Cancel culture is violent. But remember, once you go into a place like that, let's remember our food policies are violent. Our energy policies are violent. I mean, if we're really going to take on the topic of violence, there are so many ways our criminal justice system perpetrates as much violence as it responds to. So I think that we're going to be, once again, one of the things I appreciate about this organization, we've always been open to having the deeper conversation about war and peace, which includes the wars in our own hearts, and how nonviolence, even in speech, the casual way people lie, the way people judge, and also the lack of free thinking involved with the way that people believe lies so easily and so casually. But that can't be changed. None of that can be changed in a broad stroke. That has to change with the taking of responsibility in our own hearts and in our own behavior. There's an ethical malaise. There is just the very nature of American capitalism has swayed so far away from its moral and ethical center. And then when you have government that is so at the behest of that modern strain of capitalism the way it is now, you're in big trouble. And that's why, once again, going back to organizations like this, where people are having a conversation about what would it mean to be nonviolent. That doesn't mean that we will not participate in conversations like we're having tonight. I think it's important to participate, but we can participate in a way that shows respect. And also, I have to tell you something, Matthew. I said it before, but I think it's really important. There are people on the right as well as people on the left now who are recognizing that the U.S. war machine is an issue, and that the reduction of the U.S. Defense budget is going to have to be involved in any fundamental change. But then you have to recognize, if we're really going to heal this country, we have to go back and recognize what got us here, how this happened, and how a lack of a peace creation mentality caused so many of the problems that we have right now.
Yeah,
We have
absolutely.
two
Absolutely.
hands. Cliff Wittstein, you're first. If you could unmute yourself and ask your
Cool.
question.
And just before we get to the question, Cliff, one second. I just wanted to just to wrap up that on this manifesto that Marianne wrote today. I highly encourage you all to check it out, share it. It should be a wake-up call for not only the DOC, for all politics as usual in
Thank
America.
you.
And you can find it at, tell me if this is wrong, Marianne, mariannewilliamson.substack.com.
And also I've posted it on all my social media
Oh, yeah.
platforms.
Yeah,
So
sure.
you can go to my Twitter, go to Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, but also it's posted, it's landing. It's,
Yeah, good.
they're landed at
I love
the Substack. So thank you very much, Matthew.
it. Absolutely. Cool. Okay, Cliff, let's see, I'm going to ask to unmute. Oh, no, Cliff is no longer there. Mike, how about
I'm
Mike?
here.
Hi, Mike. Oh, sorry, Cliff. Go ahead, Cliff, and then Mike.
No, I lowered my hand when you said Cliff. So,
Sorry. Go ahead, Cliff.
okay. Well, thanks for taking my question. I will speak from my own vantage point. It wasn't until recently when I started down a spiritual path, following the likes of Ram Dass and Adyashanti and others, that I could begin to hear your message. My question to you is, how do we get other people to hear what you're saying when I know I spent 60 years of my life incapable of hearing you?
Your question is very significant for me based on my own personal experience. I've run for president twice. My experience does not lead me to believe that the problem is that people don't hear this. I've run for president twice, and it has only increased my faith in the decency and the intelligence of the American people. Remember, we voted for Lincoln. This country voted for Abraham Lincoln twice. The problem, and I've experienced it, is not that people can't hear this. The problem we have is this terrible gap. And it is a gap. And this relates to Matthew's talking about, a renewal of the Democratic Party. We have a political system that acts like a lid that suppresses the voice of democracy right now. Because if you actually have the voice of the people expressing themselves, listen, the majority of the American people, Republican as well as Democrat, want universal health care, want tuition-free college and tech school, and recognize that we need something like a Department of Peace, something like more proactive efforts at peace. The problem is that our political system is owned by this huge corporate matrix. And this corporate matrix includes, as I said, the military-industrial complex. The problem you have, Cliff, and I say this from firsthand experience, if you start talking like this, they come after you. It is as pure and simple as that. When I ran in 2020, they were, so they mock me and they make fun of me and they say she's a crystal lady. This time, my talking about the kinds of things I'm talking about here tonight, and everything that I'm talking about with peace, I talked about with food, I talked about with chemicals, I talked about with agriculture, I talked about with guns, I talked about with big, and there was like, get rid of her. And they come at you. I'll tell you something. When I ran for president this time, this was not true in 2020, but it was true in 24. I got a call from the FBI, and the FBI said, would you please come down to the headquarters? We'd like to give you a short briefing. And it's going to be the same briefing that we give to every other candidate. I go down and they tell you things that are going to happen. And they make it very clear. They say these things either are happening or they will be happening. This is not, they might happen. We are telling you with 100% confidence, these things either are happening or they will be happening. He said the main suspects are Iran, China, or Russia. And I'm telling you, Cliff, what I told him. I said they've already started to happen, and they didn't come from over there. They came from over here. We have a political system which sits on top of our democracy. This is why it matters that we've got, as they say, an oligarchy rather than a democracy. So when you say, how do you get people to listen? I didn't find that people didn't want to listen, but what the system does is if they don't want you to listen to someone, they will smear, they will infiltrate your campaign, they will knock you off ballots. Oh, nothing to listen to over there. She's so radioactive. make that candidate radioactive so that smart, intelligent people will feel like, well, I wouldn't listen to her. I'm too smart to listen to her. And I want to tell you something else, which is very depressing for those of us who are Democrats. I don't know what has happened in this country, but it's as though there's less free thinking among Democrats these days than among Republicans. It was unbelievably ridiculous, for instance, how in the 2024 campaign, you had so many traditional Democrats who bought this ridiculous canard, oh, we don't primary a sitting president. When anyone my age knows how ridiculous that is, we remember when Eugene McCarthy and Bobby Kennedy Sr. primaried Lyndon Johnson. And it's important that he did, by the way. Do you know why Eugene McCarthy primaried Lyndon Johnson? Do you know why Bobby Kennedy Sr. did? Because of the Vietnam War. And their primarying him is what forced Lyndon Johnson to leave the race. And then, of course, that led ultimately to the end of that war. So when you say, how do you get people to listen? You have to break through the unbelievable efforts that the system will make to peripheralize the voice of anyone that they don't want you to hear. And the only answer to that is more free thinking. And to see Democrats, who I always grew up thinking we were the free thinkers, have such a codependent relationship with the establishment elite of the Democrats that they would fall for that was very disappointing for me, not just for me personally, but really for my country, because that means that anybody having a serious conversation about the things you and I are talking about tonight, they will do whatever it takes to make sure such conversation is peripheralized. And and then the ultimate answer is keep having the conversation. You just keep pushing. I don't say what I just said and then feel, oh, there's just no hope. No, we just need to keep pushing. And I know with my own campaign, I think more and more people, then next time somebody saunters out there having conversations, whether it's about war and peace or anything else, that is inconvenient to the establishment elite, hopefully more people will say, maybe I'm not going to buy this or buy that conversation, that whatever they're doing. And to make sure, it's classic purse thief stuff. Look over here, don't look over there.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, Marianne. We'll go into the next question. But also, if anybody has a question and you just, you don't want to be on video or whatever, you can type it in the comments too, and we'll check those. Yeah, in the chat. Hey, Mike, good to see you.
Hi, Matthew, good to see you. Marianne, good to see you again too.
You too, honey.
Yeah. I want to really reinforce what you were saying about proactiveness. There's a phrase that I really come to like. We're in a stage now of a major shift in our consciousness. You call it evolutionary, and it's really in evolution has been shown to be, it's not a continuous process. It goes in leaps and bounds. So in one of these situations now, we're in the middle of this evolutionary leap, as some people are calling it, and we can jump to a higher level of consciousness, evolution of our consciousness. So I think of it as but still we have this old system that you're talking about, the pressure, the political matrix that's there. But we need that's dying. It's going to die, and the rest of us are going to die with it if we don't do something. So it's matters of hospicing that. So nonviolence is the way. So you want to hospice that as it's dying and show it out, and then and midwife the new that's coming in. So that's the proactive part, coming up with the new ideas and demonstrating it so people see that it works. And so that's demonstrating that midwifing the new as we hospice the old. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And also it's really important to which you've done a lot of this your whole career of working on the inner peace is so invaluable even before you can create the outer peace. People have to be able to have that inner peace in order to hear what we were saying earlier, the message that's going out, and thereby jump on board to midwife the new. So that's what I wanted to pass on.
That, of course, is the political philosophy of nonviolence, first articulated by Mahatma Gandhi. And then, of course, Dr. King visited India. He studied those principles and he brought them over to the United States for the application to the civil rights movement in the 1960s. We all know the line from Gandhi, you must be the change. And then the rest of that is because otherwise the change will not happen. And what you're saying is pure political nonviolence, that, as Gandhi said, the end is inherent in the means. That's part, again, I talk about that in the Manifesto for a Renewed Democratic Party, that as long as the processes are corrupt, that the result will be corrupt, that there has to be this integrative approach to politics. The 21st century mentality and mindset is far more holistic and whole person than the 20th. The 20th was very mechanistic, Newtonian paradigm. The world is one big machine. If you don't like something about it, you just tweak the pieces of the machine. It's interesting because your Gen Z generation, they're literally not 20th century people. I mean, even if they were born there, they were like babies for a while. So your younger generation does have far more of a openness to integrative issues of recognizing that what's happening inside us has a large part to do with what happens on the outside. Even when I was talking earlier about the lack of critical thinking on the part of so many voters that makes people so easy to control. Now, the way I look at it is that we have two things going on at the same time, kind of two parallel universes. One is a world that's falling apart. One is the world that you mentioned, a new world, as Arundhati Roy said, a new world that is struggling to be born. You were talking about being midwives. I think we have to be death doulas and birth doulas. We have to be allowing that which is clearly dying to die tenderly. And I think this is very important. A lot of times when people talk about how we have to transition, in order to survive, we have to transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy. We have to transition from a war economy to a peace economy. By the way, it's important to remember that the return on investment of a peace economy is actually greater than the return on investment of a war economy. So, the people who support the war economy will say, oh, there's so many jobs in defense. Well, there's so many jobs in peace creation too, healthcare, education, and so forth. But there's a term that is used, and I think it's very important. And that's when people talk about shifting from a dirty economy to a clean economy, from a war economy to a peace economy, they often say a just transition. Because when you talked about the world that's dying, Mike, yeah. But we have to be wise and responsible and nonviolent stewards of that change. Look what just happened with the murder of the CEO. There's a line in the Course in Miracles, it's not up to you what you learn, it's merely up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain. America is going to change. If our democracy is to survive and if our species is to survive, the changes will come. But you and I are responsible for whether they come through violence or through peace. And that just takes it back to full circle to what you said, that we must be as insistent that the process be peaceful as we are insistent that our goal is peace.
Thanks. Thank you for that. So true. So true. Okay, let's go to our next question from Thomas. Let's unmute Thomas.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah, hello, Marianne. It's a great pleasure and honor to meet you finally.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the work you've been doing. And yes, I'm dialing in from France, where it's like in the real middle of the night, but I was determined to join you.
Thank you.
I don't vote in America, I vote in the UK. I'm a British citizen living in France. So I look at all this from like an international perspective. I gave a talk to your fantastic group here about the idea for like a ministry of peace, which I support 100%. I proposed an idea which I independently dreamed up of sticking the thing on top of the Pentagon, a 9-sided building on top of the Pentagon. It's a very low, flat building, the Pentagon. We could build a top floor, which would be I thought it should be nine-sided. I call it the nonagon, as a symbol of this transition from the old dying world, the war economy, to a peace economy. And I've organized the Leonardo da Vinci Prize here in France to fund and reward an architect that comes up with a plan for that. So I just, wanted to flag that up because I think we have to capture the imagination of the American people and show them there's another way. The Pentagon is the largest single user of American taxpayers' dollars, and it spends more money than any other building on the planet, billions, and it's all going on the wrong things. War,
Trillions.
trillions. Okay, so my vision of capping, it's like capping, a sort of a gusher. You have to put a cap on it with a nonagon dedicated to peace, and it would have the same funding stream as the Pentagon does. So anyway, I'll send you the details, the plan. But I wanted to say I'm writing a book at the moment called The 99 Names of Peace about language. And I'm looking at, you talked about the malfunction of humanity. I see it as a malfunction of language. I'm a philosopher. I've studied world linguistic philosophy and stuff. And I think that language can only work when we speak truth clearly, gently, but also forcefully, but above all, we speak truth. And the breakdown, the malfunction is systemic lying. And one of the projects I've put together in the 99 Names of Peace is to ban politicians from lying in Congress or in Parliament. We have a bill in the UK Parliament on the floor of the House to make it a criminal offence to lie in Parliament.
Wow.
I'd love to see you guys in Congress do the same, because Gandhi said peace is caused by truth, satyagraha. And if you got a bill like that put forward, it would solve all the problems we're having. They all come from this deceit and lying. And my last point is, I'm reading an incredible book that I recommend called, forgive the language, Operation Mindfuck. It's a history of QAnon and how Trumpism was manufactured through Discordian planting of fake stuff, adrenochrome, all this stuff. And it's nailed by a journalist who studied the whole thing and says it all came from science fiction written in the 60s. It was a sort of fake thing, but that's how the mind of America was hacked. And the ideas behind that is what's called Discordianism. It's a Discordian project to create chaos. So I've coined an alternative word, Concordianism. Mm-hmm. What we have to do, what you have to do, is create concord through speaking the truth. And we have to reclaim the soul of America through the right use of language. But anyway, I love you all, and I love the work you're doing.
Thank you for staying up with us. So the first idea, I doubt that will happen in my lifetime, but the idea that one day that the Pentagon will have a new layer on the top of it dedicated to peace, I certainly love that. What we really want, of course, is for the time to come when the Pentagon won't even be necessary because war will have become just a memory. The second thing, we're not going to be able to get a congressional bill passed outlawing lies in Congress, because the people who have to vote on that are actually some of the biggest liars in our society. But more than that, it's not just the lies in Congress. It's the social media is the most toxic soup of lies. But I have to tell you something. What I saw from my own, I'm Jewish, and in the Talmud it says to lie about someone is a form of murder. There's something called lashon hora, that it's truly a big sin. And people so casually lie in our society today. But what I saw that was particularly depressing to me was not just how easily people lie, but how easily people are willing to believe a lie just because they read it on the internet. So first of all, you can't outlaw, who's to say what's the lie? But there's an ethical repair that's so needed in our society. And that's why, you know, what you're saying is very much a part of what I was talking about before. It's very Buddhist, isn't it? Right thought, right language, right speech, and right action. Words do matter. And, you know, there's a phrase, ethical fading. And ethical fading came out of this whole PR mentality. You're always trying to sell something. So you're trying to sell. I've seen it in my own office. I'll say, well, what, guys, we can't really say that. I mean, that's a little, you can't really say that. Oh, but people want that. Yeah, but that's not quite what we're offering. You know, I mean, the compromises that people are willing to make these days. And so a lot of that, unfortunately, can't be legislated away. In terms of QAnon, you know, it's very interesting. I was with a friend of mine who said, you know, Marianne, you just haven't seen the light yet. And I want you to read all this. And he started sending me the QAnon newsletter or something. And what was so horrifying was that if you just read the first few paragraphs, it sounded so spiritual. It sounded like total enlightenment talk. And then,
Yeah. I'll put in the chat the name of this book, which I recommend. It's an antidote to the QAnon and Trump sort of narrative.
And then today, even like with all this drone business, they're talking about this old conspiracy theory called Operation Blue Beam, I think. So they're already creating a narrative that, yeah, this social media, I think what's happening on social media is actually more scary than what's happening in Congress in terms of people's vulnerability to non-factual narratives. But we all, once again, we all have to take responsibility for that. I saw in my own campaign people who should have known better, just willing to buy something just because the DNC said so, without like, really, why would that be? Is that in the Constitution? That's not what happened when I was younger, and so on.
Good. Okay. Well, let's move on. We've got a few more questions and time is running out. So let's go on to Nancy. Hello, Nancy.
Hi, Marianne.
Hi, Nancy.
Well, I want to thank you for giving a voice to all of this. It's so important. I'm one of the people that's been involved with the Department of Peacebuilding campaign forever and ever. And the one thing that's really concerning me is the role that fear is playing.
What is playing?
Fear, what that's doing. People are just, the courts, the media, just the different parties, everybody is just caving to standing up to Donald Trump and standing up for what's right for our country. And so could you address that a little bit? How do we deal with that?
Well, first of all, Nancy, I want to point out here, there might be someone on this call who voted for Trump. And so the first thing I would say is for us to language it that way is by definition to cast aspersions on someone who voted for Trump. We always have to start with ourselves. We always have to start with ourselves. After what I've seen, the people I thought were the bad guys versus the people I thought were the good guys, the bad guys aren't always so bad and the good guys aren't always so good. And do you know what I'm saying? It's all that.
Yeah.
But I think that it's less about, I think the more we have the conversation about what matters, the more we articulate, you know, when you shine truth, when you have a truthful conversation, people are less vulnerable to lies. So we talk about how some people believe that the president-elect lies. Well, let me tell you something. The Democratic Party hasn't exactly told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So the way to counter lies is through speaking truth, and the way to counter fear is speaking love. And to recognize the ways, you know, I think one of the dangerous things happening right now is how many people do not know American history and do not know world history. And it's I think that's very, very dangerous. And even for those of us who are older, I think there's a role of kind of the keeper of the story. So when you say people are, let's take Israel and Gaza, okay? The lies are just unbelievable. But if you just tell the truth of what's happened, even in terms of American foreign policy, there's something extremely important for Americans to understand here. The last two American presidents who really stood for something that could have made a difference between Israel and Palestinians were Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. Jimmy Carter with Sadat, Bill Clinton with Arafat. At the time, the United States, the phrase that the United States used that was sort of the moniker for how we saw ourselves in relation to the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians was honest broker. The United States American foreign policy was such that we were trying to be an honest broker between the Israelis and the Palestinians. When George Bush became president, he ushered in an age called the neocons, the neoconservatives, and something very significant happened that you and I, as lovers of peace, would recognize was not a good idea. And that is that they took the attitude that the United States, instead of being putting the emphasis on being an honest broker, would put our emphasis, we are an ally of the Israelis no matter what. Now, remember, our creed, our vision statement, our mission statement is the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. And that doesn't just mean all Americans. So it totally makes sense that our position would be that we're seeking to see it from above. The Course in Miracles says, God does not give you victory in battle. He lifts you above the battlefield. So then we went into whatever Israel wants, which was a very fundamental change from honest broker, which Carter and Clinton had both tried very hard. Okay. Then you had Obama. Obama saw what was correct. He said, those settlements, no, those settlements aren't good, but he wouldn't spend any, he was very Obama about the whole thing, and he wouldn't actually spend any political capital. Right. And then you have Biden coming and saying, basically staying with almost a neocon type of position. Look at what we said at the beginning. As long as you stand for justice, years and years and years and years ago, if there had been a Department of Peace, there's a book, a really interesting book by Ronan Farrow called The War on Peace. Okay. And he was talking about how if it was 25 years ago and the president was meeting with foreign policy team, you would have the State Department sitting around a table in front of the president, and then you'd have the military guys around the side of the room. And in those days, if something came up and somebody said, well, we probably can't do that, the State Department wouldn't like that, somebody might go, well, somebody check with state. Today, he said it's more likely that the military guys are standing in front of us, the president, and then the State Department people are peripheral. And if somebody would say we can't do this or that because the State Department wouldn't like it, they go, ooh, I'm scared. If there had been a serious peace creation, serious emphasis conversation, when there should have been, and which there was to some extent with Carter, and there was to some extent with Bill Clinton, somebody would have been saying decades ago, this cannot continue. There is an inherent injustice here. It will blow someday. But because it was only interested in treating the symptom, it was just, we're just going to let the injustices grow. We're going to let the injustices become inherent in the system. We're going to let the injustices become so seemingly permanentized that we're going to buy into the idea that you can just, you don't take care of creating justice. This is what Martin Luther King said. There's positive peace and negative peace. If negative peace is where there's no outright violence, but there's an underlying tension and anxiety. Positive peace, he said, can only be predicated on brotherhood and justice. So the way we do now, we don't proactively create peace. And then if anything happens that is an outright expression of violence, the way we look at it today, just build more prisons or drop more bombs. And that's a perfect example. If we had had a peace creation mentality, then decades ago, the United States, because when Clinton was from 92 to 2000, right? Yeah. So once Bush came in, there was no consciousness in the country in a political sense to make it clear that we would stand on the side of brotherhood and justice, which once again, Carter tried to do, Clinton tried to do, but our whole system has just slid away from even pretending that we stand for justice. And when you don't stand for justice, then you are by definition standing for ultimate war or ultimate expression of violence. And that's true. The same is true in a corner of an American city. No economic justice, no criminal justice, etc. And then we're all surprised when violence breaks out and they just build more prisons. Part of the malfunction of our domestic as well as our international policies.
Yeah. Exactly. I agree. Well, thank you.
Yeah, it reminds me, Marianne, it might be interesting, given it's our 20th anniversary, to just spend a few minutes reminiscing. I'm remembering back to the beginning of the Iraq War in a different organization which birthed essentially the Peace Alliance, which was called the Global Renaissance Alliance. And you founded that in the 90s, late 90s, when we decided to take on the campaign for U.S. Department of Peace. It's called Peacebuilding now. Any thoughts on that? Any remembering of what caused us to take that on as an issue?
Wasn't it that we heard Dennis Kucinich talk?
Yeah, he
Yeah, we
introduced the
heard
bill.
Dennis Kucinich was talking at that point. We went to Washington, remember? I remember Joaquin Phoenix was there. Francis Fisher went. It seems, Matthew, I don't know how you feel. It's just for so many of us, and I know many of us who are older than you as well, it just seems like things are going backwards right now. It seems that it's getting worse rather than better because you have whole generations growing up now who don't even remember a time when we were trying. So much of this has become normalized. But I also believe that just even since this last election, there's been a lot of waking up and a lot of growing up. A lot of internal activation, and I see this organization as incubating that. Martin Luther King said, don't take our material passivity for weakness. We are spiritually active. And I see the value of an organization like this, and even a call like this is spiritual activism. We're rethinking this. Americans have got to start thinking again. We have surrendered our free thought. And when someone said earlier, surrendered our free thought to Donald Trump, I'm sorry, I think there's been as much surrender of free thought to the Democratic National Committee as there has been to anything on the right. Neither side of the political spectrum can be self-congratulatory at this point for the kind of citizen free thinking and standing for what we believe to be true. As there needs to be. So this whole aberrational chapter of the surrender of citizen empowerment is what's got to stop. And that's on the left as well as on the right. This surrender to the DNC as though they were going to stand for these things. When you see it up close, no, they're not. They were tied to the oligarchy. So I think that we're on the move, but we are painfully on the move. And I think that more and more people do realize the urgency of this moment. And in an odd way, I mean, I feel like, I've said for a long time, it's the 11th hour, but it's not midnight yet. I realize, well, it's 11:58, but a lot can happen in these next 2 minutes. And I actually, it's not hopeless. It's not. It's just we have to be very busy and very mature.
Agreed. Well, time is running short, so we'll take a couple more questions, but just please be mindful of time so we can squeeze in as many folks and comments, etc. Let's see. I'm not sure if it's Moji or Mohi, or you'll let me know. Please let us know your name.
Hi, this is Moji Aga, and I am in Boulder, Colorado. Hi, Marianne. I am a retired transpersonal and humanistic psychologist and Jungian and a peace activist. I'm from Iran. Originally, I'm a Sufi monk. Wow. And I am, first of all, I want to invite you to be a guest speaker at my latest peace activism venture called Peace Seeking Iranian Veterans, where Iranians and American peace seekers, especially veterans, are talking live together at the same time, and I translate back and forth. So I'll send this
Please do.
message. So,
Please.
so then the thing that I want, and I'm trying to rush, and I feel nervous. What I am seeing is what I call, and some others call in different ways, ideological populism. This is in contrast with democratic populism. Democratic populism is, for example, when Bernie says 1% and 99%, making very accessible to regular people, very complex, political, economic, whatever, realities. Ideological populism is imposed from above by people who have some kind of an ideology, whether it is racism, nationalism, Zionism, whatever the ideology, or Islamism, as in Iran. They impose it from above through two methodologies. One, massive social engineering and brainwashing. The other one is by force. And therefore they suppress and punish nonviolent resistance. So in ideological populism versus democratic populism. This is something that I hope I can, right now I can't because of the time, but something I've been working on theoretically as well as in action, creating part of what I'm doing is chambers of compassion versus chambers of commerce.
Interesting, very interesting. The difference between the ideological versus the ideological populism versus, what was the other term?
Democratic populism.
Democratic. I personally would not include Zionism in that, because I think that the word has been very much perverted for people, and there is a perverted expression of what that word even means. But I think your point is very well taken, and it's very important for the left to understand. So thank you for that. That was very illustrative.
I hope you come to the meeting.
Yeah, I'd be very please. You can talk to me through Matthew and whatever. Sure.
Through Matthew. Okay.
Yeah.
Send me an email, please. Put an email in the chat.
Anybody can email info@peacealliance.org, and if there's something appropriate for Marianne, we'll forward it along. info@peacealliance.org. So we'll go with one more with Amina. Apologies for not everybody, but just times where it is. But Amina.
Thank you, Matthew. Yes, thank you, Matthew. Hello. Hi, Marianne.
Hi.
So good to see you, and thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing your wisdom. Appreciate you always.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I along with Nancy, also serve on the committee for the National Committee for the Department of Peacebuilding. And I really appreciate what you mentioned about peace and justice. To me, they're two sides of the same coin, really.
That's right. There is no peace where there is no justice.
Exactly. But so I appreciate that. The question I wanted to ask is that in a nation that is so divided today, in terms of ideology, and especially political ideology, for a lot of people, it's nearly, unfortunately, a lot of people on the right and the left have lost hope of unity, or the possibility of unity. I was curious to kind of find out your perspective on how do you envision to a regular citizen of this country who feels that way, how they could reach unity, or how we can accomplish that.
Well, first of all, I don't think we're as divided as the system would like us to believe. Like I said, a majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care, tuition-free college and tech school, greater responsibility towards the environment, and even a reduction of the reduction of the defense budget. What's happening is what was mentioned earlier about the violence of language and so forth. You know, I have two girlfriends who are Trump supporters, and they were so supportive and kind to me during my political run. Another woman I know with whom I differ greatly on one particular issue, but she would write to me while I was going through this really awful bullying and just the humiliation and the mockery and the lies. Are you okay? It's how you talk to people. I mean, I would meet so many people at my lectures who would say, I voted for Trump, but I'd vote for you. The part of the brain that decides that analyzes an issue is not the same part of the brain that decides who to vote for. People want to feel heard. People want to feel respected. People want to feel validated. Nobody owes it to you to agree with you. Nobody owns this country, and no one has a monopoly on truth. We all have to come out of our silos. We all have to get off our high horses. I want to tell you an experience I had the other day. I was at a coffee shop. It's a coffee shop I go to quite often. A Black woman was waiting on my table. I'll point out in a moment why it's relevant. She's a Black woman. She said, how are you? I said, I'm fine. How are you? She said, I'm not doing too well. I said, because of the political or the personal? She said, well, the personal is the political. Because of the political, I'm not doing well personally. I said to her, remember your grandmother. Remember what your grandmother went through. We have to be like our grandmothers. We have to stand for, and I was talking about how we can't let each other just fall down into hopelessness, that we have to stand up as Americans. Then there's this woman, this Muslim woman in a headscarf who's at the table next to us. She says, can I join? She heard us talking. So here's this white Jewish woman, this Black woman, and this Muslim woman. And we're all leaning in, and we're talking about how we're talking as Americans, and we are honoring our grandmothers. We've got to come out of our silos. We have to have an American conversation. Now, we were all left-leaning in terms of our policies, but I've had similar conversations. We just have to talk as Americans. Each of us has to take responsibility for the easy way these days that we cast aspersions on people who don't agree with us. And listen, after what I've experienced, Fox News would have me and would treat me with respect, and CNN and MSNBC wouldn't, because they were just taking their orders from the DNC, and that to me is election interference. So this idea that one side has it right and one side has it wrong, that's how I see it. And when I think of just some of the people who have been disrespectful and kind. I went to 2 Rosh Hashanah dinners this year. One was in Washington, one was in DC. No, one was in Washington, one was in New York. The one in Washington, everybody was a Democrat, but nobody was afraid to have an honest conversation. Everybody was scared. Well, I think Kamala's going to win, but nobody's even going to put on the table what we really need to be talking about as a country. The next one was in New York. It was a right-leaning group. I don't think they were MAGA, but they were right-leaning people. And we're yelling at each other, but yelling at each other like it's a fun dinner party. And it's like, no, you can't do that, you do that. And it was just kind of, everybody is shouting, but we're all laughing because we're all shouting at each other and having fun. One man says to me at one point, he says, well, which one of us is right? And I said, we're both right. Nobody gets, nobody has a monopoly on truth. The answer is in the conversation and in the mutual respect and in the mutual love. And so that's what I think. I think, get off, and that's what I have found. I have some Republican friends and right-leaning friends who they're not the stereotypes. The stereotypes of who's good and who's bad, I think we all need to think again. And Eisenhower said the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. There are some high-minded conservative values, and there are high-minded liberal values. And at their best, there's a complementary nature. There are many things where I'm certainly not a conservative, but there are some conservative values which I can appreciate, and that sometimes contribute to my analysis of a situation even when I don't come down on the side of a certain policy. So anyway, I guess that's just my way of saying we all have to look inside our own hearts and minds and be more righteous people. I think citizenship demands it.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. You articulated it so beautifully. I'm on the same page with you, but whenever I come across that hopelessness from friends and others that I know, it's the perfect way of consoling them. Thank you for articulating it so
Thank you so
beautifully.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marianne. Not just for what you've contributed to this particular work, but for the bravery and the courage of just being out in the world in the way you are,
Oh, thank you,
even when they're
Matthew.
slapping you down. Like, it is just such a gift to humanity, even
Thank
if
you,
they don't
darling.
know it. So thank you so
Thank you,
much for everything.
darling.
Is there anything you have going on that you want to share? Anything people
Well,
know
I
about?
hope for that people who thank you for mentioning the thing I wrote today, Manifesto for a Renewed Democratic Party. I hope people
Yes.
will go to my Substack or to my social media. If you like it, if you think that there's value, please spread it around and send it out to people that you know and that you think are part of it. Part of a conversation that needs to be had right now. And
Share it.
it's so great to see all of you and to see you, Judy and Terry and Kathy Kidd and the whole gang. And it's just wonderful to see how you keep the conversation going. And it's an honor and it's exciting to continue to be part of it. Thank you, Matthew.
Good. Thank you so much,
And Andre
Marianne.
Sheldon, I see you there. Making sure American women, and I think women all over the world know we certainly have a champion in you. So it's great to see all of you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. One more important point before we wrap up. We are in the midst of the Peace Alliance, our end of the year fundraising. We're doing a 10, 20, 30 campaign. And Terry, chime in if I botch this. But we're trying to raise $10,000 by the end of the year. It's really critical funding that we need, an additional $10,000 in honor of our 20th anniversary by the 30th of December. So please, for those of you who are able, this work doesn't happen, in a vacuum. We all have to not only put time and effort into making these things happen, but we have to invest our funding into the kind of world that we want to create. And that happens often through these kinds of organizations. So we ask you very kindly to please go to our website. It's peacealliance.org. You'll see the big donate button at the top. We also have a link from Terry in the chat that you can click on directly and invest anything. It could be $5, could be $5,000. We have $4,000 right now in matched funding, so up to $4,000 will be doubled. So please consider that. This work is really important, and if we win another 20 years, we gotta have the investment. So thank you all for being here, and we look forward to continuing the conversation and the work.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much,
everybody.
Marianne.
Thank you, honey. Wonderful to see you guys. God bless you. Thank you.
God bless. Thanks, everyone.
Lots of love to all. Take care.
Happy holidays.
Yeah.
Yes.